Welcome to the region's only public safety radio talk show. It's time again for the Sheriff's Report, your weekly radio call from Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich, now in its third year on the air.
Radio base to the Sheriff. Come in, Sheriff.
Good morning, folks. For those of you that are going to be listening to this on radio, good afternoon. This is part 2 of a series titled, basically, it's a fight for the soul of America, folks. And this is the history of white supremacy. This is the history of white nationalism right here at home, right here in the inland Northwest. The first segment, we kind of laid a foundation, and now we're going to expand a little bit deeper into some of the ideology of the people that actually formed the Christian identity movement, some of the philosophies of the movement, how the movement is actually here, how one refuge of this has taken hold, and what it means for this region, and just how deeply this is started to embed in our own politics here locally. With me in studio is former Washington State Senator John Smith. John, you grew up in this environment. For those who may just be tuning in and didn't hear the last segment, you grew up in the environment of white supremacy. At the age of 14, you pretty much spoke out for the first time against it in your grandfather's own dining room. You decided you had to get out. You started working your way out of this this mindset,
right,
this philosophy. It took you moving here, but you couldn't escape it.
Right.
You realized that, whoa, wait a minute, it's here. It's still here. You were still contacted by the same very people, but there are 3 names in all the things that people send me, the things that you and I have talked about, that seem very prominent in this movement. Why don't you kind of break down those 3 names and what their philosophies are, and quite frankly, their overarching agenda?
Right. Well, like we talked about before, the Christian identity movement takes Christian verbiage and then warps it with a unique anti-Semitism, very hateful racial overtones. So early on, my grandfather was contacted by the Aryan Nations folks over in North Idaho, and through that relationship, he got to know the movers and shakers with the Order, which the Order was kind of the militant arm of what the Aryan Nations did. They were the ones, blowing up armored cars and killing people. And through them, my grandfather came to know of a man named Pete Peters, who was a prominent mover and shaker during the 80s and early 90s in the Christian identity movement. He was from Colorado. And where it really turned devious is Pete Peters liked confrontation. So he would specifically seek out people that he could argue with and develop a fight. Well, one of those people was a talk show host, I believe in the Denver area, named Alan Berg. And Pete Peters often would brag about how he was ready to engage this guy, and he was Jewish, so he would, often the conversation was very anti-Semitic. And ultimately, it was those conversations, that back and forth, the prodding that Pete Peters gave, talking about how this Alan Berg was literally, as a Jew, he was literally the seed of Satan, literally descended from Satan himself, and that the Jews were the root of all evil in the world. And it was that kind of rhetoric that drove radical members of the Order to actually kill Mr. Berg. And so it wasn't just talk. That talk actually led to action. And so Pastor Peters, as he liked to call himself, he lived in an area in Colorado. There weren't a lot of folks around, so he would hold these annual camps, and he would go to different gatherings, and he would speak himself. Well, at those camps, they would attract Christian identity or white supremacist speakers from all over the country. And the idea was they would come, they would be trained, and then they would be sent back into the world to evangelize their message of what they called the kingdom of God, which literally has nothing to do with the kingdom of God. And one of the themes that Pete would often teach in these areas is early on he started getting that racist label. And so he would teach this idea that as the white people who were at the top of God's food chain,
They were actually members of the lost tribe of Israel.
right? As white people, all of them were like the chosen, and then beneath them were all of the other races, races, tongues, and tribes. And then finally down at the bottom were the Jews, who were literal descendants of Satan and who were intent in destroying white people.
And if you're wondering how that relationship works, according to this ideology, Eve had sex with Satan, and therefore the Jewish nation was born out of that interaction.
So the sick stuff. And so what Pete would teach is that in order to protect themselves from the Jews and the global conspiracy that they had, that it was important that those who knew what was going on, i.e. Christian identity folks, white people, that they reach out and they develop relationships with what he called the children of this world. And so what that literally meant is other races. So Pete would demonstrate this at his white supremacy camps, where he would invite black speakers, Hispanic speakers, Jewish speakers to come in and actually present to his group telling his message. And he would use this as a demonstration, and he would say, see, you just need to find somebody who has woken up and who sees the truth, and then when they come and accuse you of being a racist, you can bring out your black friend or you can bring out your Mexican friend, and you can say, I'm not racist, I just believe in the truth. I'm being misrepresented. And this was actually demonstrated within the order itself. This was a white supremacist, whites only, they were fighting for a whites only nation. And yet when you look at the list of the people that were in the order, you had a Martinez, you had a Jewish man, you had all these people that weren't white because they'd followed Pete Peters' plan of go out and recruit children of the world so that you can better display this message and better get it out into the world. And it doesn't quite taste so bad. And so today we see this even on a bigger level because honestly in today's society, yes, white supremacy still exists, that's what we're talking about, but it's not as acceptable as it used to be. So what that means is those same white supremacist ideals from the 80s and 90s and even before, they're being repackaged and reprocessed. And you're seeing them invite folks of color into their ranks as long as they accept the idea that the Jews are the real problem. And as long as they accept the worldview of the general worldview, well then, yeah, these are our friends, and they want to have them. You'll see them surround themselves or try to, like James Alsop in his famous picture with the Congresswoman. That is what they would do. That was a part of Pete Peters' plan, is get yourself in pictures with prominent politicians. Get yourself associated so that you're more acceptable. So then when accusations are made, you can say, see, I'm just like one of these, and I'm a victim. And that was a part of their plan.
And that plan played out over the last few weeks, folks. As exactly what I have heard from Northwest Grassroots is, we're the victim, we're the victim. You know, how dare you? How dare you call us anything? You know, we're the victim. We didn't know. Well, look, see, we're good friends with this person or that. We saw all of that play out in this community in the last 2 weeks. Exactly that game plan. And it is a nefarious game plan. And that game plan is not just being used on the right, on the GOP. The Democrats and the left have had the same infiltration. There's an organization here in Spokane that was infiltrated by that mindset because the Aryan Nation Christian identity movement consider the Palestinians and Hamas and all those who are against Israel to be the victims.
Right.
They're actually the good guys. You mentioned that Adolf Hitler formed relationships with the very families that are still causing all kinds of problems in the Middle East for that very reason. So it's not just the right, folks. You on the left, you need to pay attention, because you had it happen. I'm glad to see that relationship is fading, and you're reaching out to the Jewish community, and that bond's trying to be healed. Folks, I'm not going to mention that organization because they are trying, the Jewish community, and they are trying to heal. I'm going to allow that process to happen, but you know what I'm talking about. This is not just one party's problem. This is a national problem. This truly is for the heart of America. We cannot allow this ideology to take another step forward. It has to end. Go on with a little bit more of their, if you will, the master plan, because
right.
This is very much in the essence of Hitler.
Right. So I actually never attended any of Pete Peters' camps, but my grandfather did, and so did a lot of his friends. So they would come back really excited after every camp. They'd come back supercharged, and they'd have their cassette tapes and their booklets, and they'd make copies and they'd distribute them. And like you were talking about in the Target windshield from the KKK, well, they would do that sort of thing. And the whole idea was they were trying to wake people up. That's what they would say, trying to get them to know the truth, that the Jews are actually controlling the world. So one of the guys that they came back really excited over was a man named Colonel Jack Moore, who was retired military. And his basic mantra was the Jews were bad, but that there was a civil war coming, and that civil war would allow the white people to once again rise up and throw off the control of the Jewish power brokers, and would once again allow them to create their white-only nation. Because for Jack Moore, it wasn't just creating a region that was white-only. Jack Moore believed the entire United States should be white-only. So he had conversations about, shipping everybody else out and how that would all work. But the way that he said they were going to facilitate this plan was that they would start off by finding small, lightly populated counties that had low voter turnout, and that they would focus people from all over the world that had woken up or understood how bad the Jews were. They would encourage them to all move into these lightly populated counties, set up their own small independent communities, and then gradually, as they had the population, slowly develop relationships within the community, and then begin to take over the local county government offices. And a part of Jack Moore's plan was, once they had taken over those county offices and could speak officially on behalf of the county, well, then they would create circumstances where they would have armed conflict with state and federal agencies. So that might be over a property rights issue, or it might be because they didn't want to let an interracial couple get married. It might be a wide range of things. The idea is they needed to get control and then pick a fight. And the picking the fight was the facilitation. And the word that they would use for that catalyst, that moment, was when it all falls apart.
It all falls apart.
And you hear this today, when it all falls apart, or when the crap hits the fan, or when things go down. That's in the white supremacist mentality. That's what they're talking about, is that moment when it's finally going to happen, and they're going to go to arms, and they're going to take over the government.
Now, folks, if you think that far-fetched couldn't happen, really? Let's take a look at 2015, 2016, late 2015, organization by the name of COWS, Coalition of Western States, which was formed after the Bundy standoff in Nevada. It was formed by State Representative Matt Shea. Starts posting information about the Harmons from Harney County in Oregon. How this rancher and his family are being horribly bullied and horribly mistreated and imprisoned by the federal government, and horrible circumstances behind it. Now, I will give the Hammonds a tip of my hat on the fact that they said, "Hey, look, we don't want your help. we don't want this. We made a plea. We're going to go. We're going to go to prison. But it didn't end there. The Bundys decided to go up. They caused all kinds of hate and discontent. Small rural county, targeted, because Sheriff Ward, I believe, only has like 4 deputies for that huge county. And they took over the Mauer Refuge. And then they tried to take over the local government. They formed citizen safety committees, I believe is what they called it. And, they actually tried to literally take over that county government. It happens across the board. I've seen Facebook posts between these people in this movement, Ed Pace and another guy, talking about we need to take over the libertarians need to take over the Republican Party. This is the game plan. They're kind of following it out just exactly the way it's described here. And you don't have to take John and I's word for this. Do the research. Go online. Read the books. There's countless volumes of information written about this. Last night I was reading an FBI report, I think it was dated 1986, on these people and their game plan and their movement. So the colonel has a strategy. John, have you seen that strategy be played out? Yes,
I have. So at one of Pete Peters' summer camps, Peters, Moore, and a half a dozen other people came together and drafted a document called the Remnant Resolves. And in that document, they essentially outlined the planks of what their future kingdom would look like, what their future nation would look like. And it included things like no interracial marriage, that Jewish people weren't allowed to hold office, and the only people allowed to hold office were white Christian, I think it was just white Christians. And in that document, they all came together, and they, in their view, thought that this was like their Declaration of Independence. And so it was a huge honor to be invited to be a part of this conversation, and then it was a huge honor to sign your name at the bottom of the document and apply your support of this whole plan. So the Remnant Resolves was the definition of what the government was going to look like, and Jack Moore's plan about taking over county government was the way that it would be implemented. And so here, signed on that line, right along with Pete Peters and Jack Moore, are two Stevens County residents, or one Stevens County resident, Barry Bird, who lives in Stevens County, has for quite a while. He and his wife founded a community called the Marble Community. They took an old ghost town, and they decided that they were going to make it a holy ghost town, and that this was going to be their, I think they called it a covenant community. So they actively took part in county government, and as I said in the last segment, when I initially moved to Washington State, some of their people came to me and said that finally, this is it. This is how it's all coming down. This is how the kingdom's coming. We did the Remnant Resolves, and the plan is in place. That's what Marble is all about. Come join us so you can be a part of the kingdom. If you don't, you're going to be missing out. And I was 17 years old at that time. I wasn't even old enough to vote. I was still a minor, for crying out loud, and they were compelling me to be a part of this. And when I heard their description and the connection to Peters and to Jack Moore and et cetera, I was literally terrified, because this is exactly what I had come to Northeast Washington to not be a part of. And so I got out of that conversation as quickly as possible and said I wanted nothing to do with it. And in response to that, there was a curious part of the conversation where they said, well, you're not going to be welcome in this community if you don't become a part of this, because this is what's going to happen. We have a lot of connections here, and this is what this county is going to be like. We're going to take over this county. And so I said, well, I don't want any part of it, and I don't think there's a lot of other people that are going to want a part of it either. And they said, well, we're going to make it really uncomfortable for you to be here. And so, I was 17, so that was years ago when that happened. So the birds, if you look at kind of their history, I mentioned in the last segment that originally met them at the white supremacist gatherings that my grandfather was a part of down in Boise. They were a part of every part of that conversation, so in agreement that the Jews were at the root of all the problems, that the interracial stuff was bad, and that we needed to go back and reestablish America as a country that was the way they said it should be. They signed in the Remnant Resolves, and then I would like to think that certainly I've changed in 30 years. I would like to think that they would as well. But then in just a few years ago, 2014, they invited another speaker from Pete Peters that used to be a regular speaker at Pete Peters' camps to come and be a speaker at their God and Country Days, John Weaver. Well, just so that you know who John Weaver is a radical guy who believes that the Civil War, the South should have won. He believes that slavery was a good thing. He believes that what needs to happen is another Civil War, that counties and areas all over the country need to secede, and that we need to go back to the good old days when the way that things were prior to that. He was the chaplain for one of the organizations that was responsible for radicalizing Dylan Root to walk into a black church and shoot people while they were praying.
Do you remember that name, Dylan Root? Do you remember that incident? That happened just very recently, folks. 2016, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, right in that time frame. This is still going on. These people are still radicalizing people to that level. Again, radicalized hate is their goal. That is the goal of this group. John's been telling you about the remnant. Now here's a sentence out of the remnant, and this will be in prep for segment 3, which is going to cover a little bit more of this Civil War notion, a little bit more of this breakup of the United States, if you will, and the concept of a 51st state, because it's kind of all rolled in there, folks. It says the role of the civil authority is to administer God's law. Okay? That's one little sentence, and it spells it out very, very clearly. There's also a paragraph that reads, the remnant of Israel is impelled to challenge those evil, small-minded men who seek to pervert justice and who openly rebel against the law of God. We commit them to the one great lawgiver and judge, and he will judge them according to his righteousness, which comes to certain labels such as agents of Satan, and what that truly means. I mentioned that in segment 1. Segment 3, we're going to wrap it up, and we're going to bring this thing home, because we've set the stage, folks. Pastor Weaver was actually invited to a church, I believe, here in Spokane County to preach. Northwest Grassroots covered that one too. So this is a continuing theme of decades of hate, decades of radicalized hate, decades of death, destruction, crime. And the thing is it's very much, if you speak out against it, you are labeled. And that label means something. John, we have about a minute. The 3 people you mentioned, there's only one left, right?
Right.
And that's Pastor Weaver.
Yes.
Is he still active?
He still is active. I looked up on his website before and after he had visited the God and Country celebration at Marble, and his message before he got there was why slavery was okay, and the message afterward was a multi-part series talking about how the Jews killed Christ, how they were the seed of Satan, and why they were in control, and that our only hope was to break their control over the world.
Another featured speaker at that particular event was Representative Matt Shea. Matt speaks at almost every one of them that I can think of for the last several years. He spends a lot of time in Stevens County and around this message, around these people. So I think that it's really important that we understand where some of our leadership is. Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich, we're going into segment 3 for those that are following us live on Facebook. For those that are going to listen to this on online on podcast, you're going to have 3 chances, section 1, 2, and 3, and then on ACN, the fabulous 6:30 on Saturday at noon. We'll talk to you later.
The Sheriff's Report is a joint production of Spokane Talks Media and KTW 630 AM and 96.5 FM, which are solely responsible for its content. Ask a question, recommend a guest, or watch this program again anytime at SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Have a safe day.